Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. This is going to be an interesting conversation today. We have lots to talk about. The University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is going to start offering what are called flexible degree programs. It's online learning taken one big step further. We're going to talk about the growing number of young people with the HIV virus and why so many don't even know that they have it. And we'll wonder out loud if Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke's latest complaint has any merit. All right, let me introduce our guest today. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally with us. And of course, Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. You know Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And of course, Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. Next fall, UWM will be the first school in the country to offer what are called flexible online degrees. You can take all these courses, you take them at home, online, you take them at whatever pace you want to. It's not like you have to finish a course in one semester. If you can prove competency, you pass, you get credit, and then you go on. You can even get credit for life experience, work experience, military experience. Is this college education in the 21st century, Gerard, or is it just going to be a cheap way to make sure we have more college graduates?
Both. And I don't know whether it's a cheaper way to get more college graduates because you'll still have to have counselors who will have to take a look at transcripts and make a determination as to what's worthy of an earned credit. When you begin to review things like work experience or life experience. I think it's a smart way to go, however, because we do have a large number of people who began some level of college experience, whether it was in a 2-year program or a 4-year program. They didn't complete. They still reside here in the state. It would be great if we could move them further along in the process of getting a degree. We know that people who have degrees are more likely to earn more money and have greater potential to make contributions to the civic life and the economic life in this community. So from that standpoint, it's smart. I think it is going to be a terribly cumbersome process, though, to move people through this elongated experience. People who tend to procrastinate, this is not the kind of program that's for them. Because I don't know that there's going to be the level of encouragement that's necessary to move them along and help them to finish.
Can you really learn, Denise, if you're not in the classroom?
Well, sure. I think people in the workplace learn things every day. And I think this recognizes the fact that there are different ways in which people learn and gain knowledge. You don't always gain knowledge by being in front of a college professor who, sometimes may not have. I'm sorry, but who sometimes.
Yeah, you are outnumbered.
Unlike professors here on this panel, sometimes you get a professor who doesn't have, where you have more life experience and more actual practical experience in the subject that you're learning about.
Not in the case of these people. They've got far more life experience than their students.
I would agree.
Scores
Kevin.
of years.
Yes. So I think this is a great way to recognize there are different ways in which people learn, to give people credit for what they've learned, and to allow people to become college graduates. Some people drop out of college for a lot of different reasons. One reason in which people drop out is because the learning style in which we traditionally teach at the collegiate level may not be their style of learning. This allows them to bring the knowledge that they have into the classroom, whether it's online or they actually decide they're going to take a class where they're actually interacting face-to-face with their peers and a professor. And it gives us the ability to have more college graduates. When we take a look at how we stack up as a state compared to the number of college graduates that we have compared to, let's say, Minnesota, we are woefully behind Minnesota, and it does impact what happens in terms of new businesses coming to the state. They take a look at how well prepared people are, whether or not we like it. One of the things they take a look at is the percentage of individuals that we have in the state with college degrees. I think this is really smart. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's going to allow people who have the ability and the knowledge to complete their bachelor's degrees, and in some cases master's degrees, to be able to do that now. And I think that's good for everybody.
Kevin, I heard somebody say the other day they thought it was kind of coddling people, though, and saying, no, you don't have to go to the classroom, you don't have to jump over this hurdle, you don't have to finish by the end of the semester, you can do things the way you want to do them.
I suppose you could make that interpretation of it, and it certainly looks on the surface where, okay, we'll make this as easy as possible for you to get a degree at your own pace, and a lot of would-be graduates, if you will, would look at that and say, wow, yeah, why not? This is interesting. This is very intriguing. You have a lot of those people that started for whatever reason, they started and then got out of it, and it's prohibiting their advancement in the business world or in society. This could be a great help to them. I worry, like as you stated about the procrastinators, I wish there was a timeline on here, that there would be a strict deadline. There's not. So because you don't have any end game that's firmly written down, there's no incentive, if you will, to get the job done with a certain amount of time, and you have to exhibit some sort of self-discipline, much like people who work out of the home. That's not as easy as it sounds. The other thing I would point out is this has the potential of being a cash cow, that it could really bring in a lot of revenue. And if the people who are going to run this and set it up have big dollar signs in their eyes,
And they do.
and this translates into not so cheap fees, not so cheap tuition.
Yeah.
Let's see what the Board of Regents does as far as setting fees for these online classes. That's the big question mark I have.
Then why not do the same thing for elementary school and high school?
Well, there are a variety of types of learning at those levels too, and as Denise says, and I think the secondary schools and elementary schools are learning that too. But in this particular case, I'm not so concerned. I do know that there is a huge financial motive behind this. I mean, we all know that. Any way that college campuses these days can capture more students, more ways, they will go for it. And here's the thing I came from a small town of 3,000 people. Going to Indiana University in Bloomington.
Eye-opener?
Was it ever? And it really changed my life. It really did. And it was not all just the classroom experiences that changed my life. The social level and the political involvement and everything else that is involved in a college campus. And I would hate to see this idea replace that, because I think so much of the college learning experience,
human interaction,
is absolutely outside the classroom. At the same time, you know, at UW-M, and Gerard knows this, you know, there are all kinds of online courses already. This is not new at all. It's just a matter that they're now going to shape these into actually being able to finish degrees and that kind of thing. So, but I think the college experience, the full college experience, is still the most educational and sometimes the greatest experience you can have in your life.
Hit
All right,
the nail on the head.
Next topic. The Center for Disease Control announced this week that 6 out of 10 young people who are infected with the HIV virus don't even know it. The infection rates are actually increasing for people between the ages of 13 and 24, primarily among gay and bisexual young black men. Now, after 30 years of AIDS education and so many warnings in all areas of life about how unprotected sex can lead to AIDS and death, how can the infection rate among any group be going up?
Education is one reason why it's going up. I think visually, the young people don't see the impact of AIDS the way we saw it when AIDS came to be a regular part of the discussion in our cultures. It's certainly when you look at the 1980s and then the 1990s, when so many advocates for getting tested, using safe sex practices, making sure that hospitals were and clinics were more accessible to people who might be infected by the disease. All these things have kind of moved to the side, and certainly the stigma of AIDS has not been what it was back in the 80s and 90s. And I think that so many people, so many young people especially, are seeing people who live now 20, 30 years with AIDS and don't see it as the same kind of threat. So they don't go out and get tested for a life-threatening disease in the same way that people may have done 20, 30 years ago.
Is it fair, Kevin, to say that the government's not doing enough?
Oh, I think the government is doing a lot. And it's not just the government, it's philanthropists, it's advocates, it's nuns and their work not only here in America but overseas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Could the government do more? Maybe. I was reading an article from the summer from liberal columnist Eugene Robinson, not a fan of conservatives, but he did say this, that the greatest accomplishment during the George W. Bush era was setting up the program PEPFAR, which targeted Africa primarily, and
Sub-Saharan Africa.
we started doing more treatment of more people, and suddenly people stopped dying.
Right.
And maybe we need to use a similar approach here in our country to reverse this, because I don't have an explanation. If more people are being treated, why is this still a problem? And maybe we should be talking about it more, right? Back in the 80s, it was in the press each and every day. Sometimes that information was not correct, but the awareness was high. I don't think that same awareness is there. We're talking sex education in the classroom. That's fine. But I think you also in the classroom need to talk about the dangers of sexual activity, because the shocker here is that you have young, infected people who don't know they're infected, who are now unwillingly, unknowingly infecting other young people.
Why would you say, Denise, that the rates are higher among gay black men than white gay teenagers and young men?
Well, I think when you take a look at that age group, first of all, that's an age group that feels like they're invincible. So they feel like none of these bad things that we as adults talk about are going to happen to them.
Which is why
it's
you start
always
smoking
somebody
at
else.
that age. You're
Exactly.
invincible.
Right. All of those bad habits that we pick up in life, sometimes we pick up at that age group. So I think that that's part of it. I do think that in the African American and to an extent to the Latino communities, AIDS is still something of a taboo subject. And I think that if you're a young person who thinks you don't have to worry about this, and then you kind of layer on that the real feeling of the fact that in some communities, AIDS is what you get for behaving in certain types of activities. That's your punishment for that. That for young men who think maybe they might need to get tested, there is a real reluctance and hesitancy to do that. And I just want to kind of follow up on something that Kevin said about former President Bush's plan in Africa to really provide incredible AIDS drugs. That was very true, but one of the great criticisms was we didn't have that kind of energy in this country talking about AIDS to our own young people. And so I think that the idea of figuring out how we need to go back and take a look at this very vulnerable population and how we reach out to them in messaging and in different forms of media, including social media, that we don't really do right now is something that if we're going to really try to get a handle on this and stem that tide, we've got to be able to take a look at some non-traditional ways that we work to inform young people about
Gerard hit on something, though. I think it's true. I mean, and I was there in WTMJ the day that Magic Johnson made that big announcement, and it can happen to people like him, and we see him, and he's been a terrific spokesperson for AIDS prevention, AIDS education, et cetera. But then you may have a contingency that sees people like Magic Johnson succeeding even though he contracted AIDS. Other people living longer, and again, the imminent danger just isn't there to a lot of folks.
Is part of the reason that it's embarrassing for a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid to say, "Can you test me for AIDS?" I mean, it's embarrassing to ask for condoms. It's probably incredibly embarrassing to say, "Could you please test me for AIDS?"
Exactly. But I think there are several things involved here that we haven't mentioned, and one is, boy, we still are not very grown up in this country about even talking about sex. We really aren't. We mentioned sex education. it is shocking to me that sex education is still controversial, and that there are people who want to get it out of the schools or teach abstinence only and don't teach anything about protection. And you know, that is just appalling when it does lead to illness and death, and can. But you know, we are just not very grown up about talking about something that is part of all of our lives. You know, our sex lives are, you know, one of the most important parts of our lives, and we are so reluctant to even bring it up to young people. There's another, I think one of the problems why it's higher in the African American community, frankly, is fundamentalist religion. Homosexual activity has to be so hidden in the black community. The macho image, same thing goes in the Latino community. The macho image, no one could admit to gayness, and as a result, you know, they don't get the messages that they should be getting, or they don't want to, as you say, come forward and be tested or anything else, because it is so, you know, considered, you know, just unclean or a sin, or and instead of a normal part of life.
When being tested for AIDS really should not be an embarrassment.
It shouldn't be.
It's simple and easy and
it shouldn't
straightforward.
be. And you know, I think when we talk about the fact that this is taboo, where are young people then able to get information that really helps them be aware of the risk, and just as importantly, the prevention? I can't speak for every other school system, but in Milwaukee Public Schools, you know, it's a tough topic sometimes for some teachers to talk about. But it is. But you know, several times, you know, as students go through this curriculum, particularly at the middle school and high school levels, there is this discussion about if, you know, gay and bisexual men need to take these precautions. And I think that it's great for that to be in the schools, but I agree with you. As a community, as a nation, we've got to do a better job.
It should be in the schools. It should be in the schools as opposed to behind a billboard. But the how is always the controversy.
These
how
home AIDS tests will make a difference, a huge difference, I think, in the ability of people to privately test themselves. There will be an economic factor involved in that, though, and some of those kits will have to be made free for those that live in poverty, that really are perhaps one of the prime targets for getting AIDS.
That challenge, though, is figuring out how, when people take these tests and they have a positive result, they get help.
How they deal with it. Right.
Next topic.
Oh, boy.
Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke complained this week about a guy being released on $500 bail after he was arrested and charged with grabbing and groping 3 female joggers. He called the low bail insensitive and an insult. Now, Kevin, if your daughter was one of the victims, though, would you be upset if a guy was released on $500 bail?
Absolutely. You're talking low bail. It is low bail. I think you get higher fines if you're caught illegally skateboarding in some communities. His job is to be a law enforcer, and he's tough on it. And I applaud the sheriff for calling out some of these judges, because we know, or at least I recognize, that not every judge in Milwaukee County is going to hand out the kind of sentences that I think should be meted out. He's done his job, and I think this is a frustration not only for the sheriff but for officers in the Milwaukee Police Department. They do their job. They catch the bad guys. They're charged, and then they get into court, and then they get a slap on their wrist. This guy has not been just groping women, but he's got a felony record. He should have the book thrown at him. And I don't think the judge should be criticized. On this program, we don't criticize the police chief when he grandstands about how tough his department has been on crime. I don't think we should criticize the sheriff either for saying what's right about a guy that obviously has a problem. There's been a pattern of sexual misconduct. We need to get him out of the neighborhoods where he's been preying on innocent women, instead of slapping him on the wrist only to send him out where we know he's going to repeat those crimes again.
Or as part of the job that a judge has to say, we have to keep our jail population down. I determine this person is not that dangerous.
That's got nothing to do with it. I'll tell you what it has to do with it, and why David Clarke is a fraud. The purpose of bail is to have a person who has been charged but not convicted of anything return to court for trial. That's the reason for bail. The reason why you would set such a high bail that he would remain incarcerated is because he is so dangerous and violent that you can't have him out in the community. Do you know what this crime really was? This crime was someone on a bicycle trail, riding on the bicycle trail and slapping these women on the butt. This was his crime. Now, is that a dangerous person we can't have free in our community? No.
You condone that, Joel?
I don't condone anything, but I'll tell you this, to say that he should be locked up and have the key thrown away is absurd, and a judge didn't even set this bail. This bail was set by a court commissioner. That's the job of a court commissioner. It's not David Clarke's job. The job of charging this man was not David Clarke's job. That was the job of the district attorney. The job of ultimately deciding the guilt or innocence on this misdemeanor, and it's a misdemeanor, is going to be a judge's, and he will then decide whether there's any sentence, any jail time or not for this misdemeanor. But David Clarke wants to be not just the guy that makes the arrest, the guy who decides the bail, the guy who decides the conviction, and then decides how long to send this guy away. And that's not his job.
Do you say fourth-degree sexual assault, no big deal?
No, I don't think it's no big deal. Perhaps I'm a little more sensitive to this than maybe other folks are on the panel, but I don't think that there's any such thing as a minor case of sexual assault. It may be slapping somebody on the butt, but quite frankly, I didn't ask him to slap me on the butt. Neither did any of these women.
Upset if he did it.
And I think that these women absolutely have the right to have their day in court and to feel like they're protected. I think this is a matter where, in some cases, whether it's a judge or a court commissioner, their hands, when it comes to setting bail, are tied by judicial precedents and judicial procedures. You can't take something as offensive and as angry as it makes people and decide you're going to set a bail that's X because there's outrage in the community because people find out about it, when in fact there are cases of second and third degree sexual assault or first degree sexual assault that we don't know about, where there are also bails set that many people think are too low. So, a judge has to work within those parameters. Now, Sheriff Clarke, personally, I'm glad to see he's made the switch from his summer white cowboy hat to his black cowboy hat. But, I think the sheriff has got a lot of things to worry about. I don't think this is one of them. I do think it's part of his repeated pattern of grandstanding to the media and, quite frankly, trying to get the media, which it always seems to do, to pay attention around these issues where, quite frankly, he has no business, and ignore some of the other more substantial issues that are going on in the sheriff's department.
Okay when he
but that's not the topic.
It's okay when he grandstands, but when a conservative grandstands...
No. I mean, Kevin, if you'll go back, you'll see that I have had criticism of the police chief as well, so that's not the issue. This is not his business.
Is he standing up for the victims?
The sheriff is an elected official who has credibility in speaking out around public policy. I think he did a fine job.
All right. Let's switch from a ticked-off sheriff to a tender-hearted governor. 3 weeks after Election Day, some of the winners are still celebrating, of course, but some of those who came up short are trying to fix their mistakes for next time. Rick Horowitz has been paying close attention, and he's so touched by the effort. Rick.
It's easy sometimes to think that our public officials don't really care about the public. Well, I'm here to tell you that kind of thinking is wrong. And Exhibit A, our very own governor, Scott Walker. Scott Walker was out in California just a little bit ago giving a speech at the Ronald Reagan Library. Hey, it beats sitting around in Wisconsin worrying about criminal investigations closing in, right? Anyway, Scott Walker made clear in that speech how much he cares about one particular slice of the public, the elderly. Okay, not all the elderly, one particular slice of the elderly poll workers. That's right, those nice people who sit at those long tables and check you in to vote on Election Day. Scott Walker wanted everyone to know he was concerned about these people, about their working conditions. He wants to do something to improve those conditions. Softer chairs? Nope. More frequent potty breaks? Nope. Scott Walker wants to eliminate same-day voter registration to help the poll workers, those poor poll workers. They're wonderful volunteers, the governor said, but they work 13-hour days, he said, and most of them are retirees. It's difficult for them to handle the volume of people who come at the last minute, he said. But if we got rid of same-day registration, it'd be easier for our clerks to handle that, the governor said. Isn't that just the sweetest thing? Scott Walker being so worried about burdening those kindly retirees with all those new voters showing up? And wouldn't getting rid of all those new voters totally solve the problem? You bet it would. Or at least it would solve some problem. It seems that the more people turn out to vote, the tougher it is for Scott Walker's party to win elections. And new voters, young voters, non-wealthy voters, minority voters, tend to vote for Democrats. Well, we can't have that. But what can they do about it? Passing new voter ID laws didn't work. The courts shot them down. Spreading scare stories about voter fraud didn't work either. The voting was clean and decisive. So let's stand up for poll workers. Yeah, that's it. We're protecting our poll workers. What compassion. What creativity. What a crock.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, stay dry, enjoy the rest of your weekend.